bought a suit. Went down, was it 2 weekends ago, and found a suit that I liked, and didn't have the pants that matched the coat. I was like, I'll just go online, just buy it, and it was cheaper. And then they showed up today. Pants fit, the suit fits. Going to need some alterations, but real quick at Mary's. And I'm like, why are the pants a different color than the suit jacket? Just enough of a difference. It's like, I think if it didn't bother me, it would be okay. But they should be the same color. So,
were they the same brand? Were they a match deal?
Purchasing them, it didn't have the option to do top and bottom. So you had to purchase them separately. And I thought, I assume it's my fault. I'll lead with that. But they're so close in color, and it's the same make model, because I looked at the one that was, they had the set at the store. Like, okay, it's got to be this, but I couldn't find the SKU on it. It was a thing, but it looked right. And I could get away with it, but I don't want to.
What are you going to do? Can you return a suit?
Yeah. I haven't altered it or anything. It's just came straight out. Hi.
Welcome back. Got Tim Watson back, Sergeant Tim Watson back. Also have the lovely Felicia back. So Tim and I just had a long conversation, previous episode, about police recruiting, and it kind of morphed into technology, and just, it did what conversations do, it morphed. And so we put a pin in that. We regrouped, we invited Felicia to join us partly to test our third microphone input, which may or may not work. We may sit in here for an hour and talk, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever, and it may be garbage because her microphone may be trash. So we'll see. We're also obviously experimenting with the camera angles and things like that. And so, kidding aside and logistics aside, one reason to bring her in is she often has, both welcome and unwelcome, a different perspective on some of the things we talk about. And so I thought it'd be fun to just continue our conversation on police recruiting and the hiring process, the way things have changed, the outlook on way things are changing, the political, social influences of police work and the culture around it. And then see if she has any insight to share with us. And so, if you could, I had a couple questions on that piece of paper. Would you hand me that paper? So, one of the things I thought we would kick off with was, let's just see where this takes us. What advice would you give someone who's interested in pursuing a career in law enforcement today?
What are the key things that a person needs to know today is research. Research the job, research what it means to be a police officer in a city compared to being a deputy sheriff, to being a trooper. Look at multiple outlets, look at the social media sites as you're doing your investigation. Because if you want to be a police officer, you're going to do investigations for the rest of your career. So look into it and see if that matches what your self-assessment is. And we've talked before in another episode about having an honest self-assessment of yourself. Do I have the temperament for the job? What does that look like? And you'll find the answers that you're looking for through your investigation of the various departments and what they have to offer. We get people that come in for our interviews, which is a part of the process, as an oral board interview, that I should say clearly have not really contemplated all that the job entails. What effects does it have on the person and also family? So seek knowledge and chart a path. What we like to see is people that have charted a path to success and accomplished it. And then they have another goal and they accomplish it. So, hey, out of high school, say you wanted to go to college. And so I set this path to go to college. Completing college or not, it should lead to another discernible path that you went on to. Say, man, I started college. It wasn't for me, super expensive. I had a family trade to go to. So I went and did that. That seems like a logical path. And so I became successful at plumbing or whatever the path was. But now I want to get back to my law enforcement career. Or it's, man, I charted a path. I went to community college, got a criminal justice degree, went to work for a short period of time while I could get a job in law enforcement. Very just linear path. Other people meander, which is good because they get a diverse background. Mm-hmm. So no two paths are the same. The only things that you need to avoid are getting yourself in criminal trouble. Keep your nose clean. Don't do drugs, even if they are legal where you're at. Consider not doing and smoking those drugs. Alcohol at a moderation. You don't want to come up and try to talk about through the red flags you created with the multiple DUIs or binge drinking that happens. That could lead to some problems later in life because you're going to enter a somewhat pretty stressful career. So those are some of the things I think of.
When we talked before about Casey, my daughter that is kicking around the idea of being a police officer, she's in EMT school now. Part of me hopes that she just loves that and she gets a job on a fire truck. But when she was graduating high school and looking at what her options were, and college wasn't really a good fit, she just kind of burned out with school, and it was like maybe someday, but not now. The conversation she and I had, and I know I've touched on this in the episode back in November or whatever, but was kind of like, from experience, kid, you are burned out on college. If you go now, I just fear that you'll have debt and no degree. And so maybe just put a pin in it. She's definitely bright enough, smart enough and all that. It was nothing to do with that. It was just like, she was just finished, like get me to graduation. And so the idea of going to college just didn't seem right at the time. And so she's now in EMT school and she's paying for that out of pocket, a couple $1,000 and buying time to her 21st birthday when she could consider testing for law enforcement. And recently I gave her advice, like there's nothing magic that happens when you're 21. You just become lawfully able to possess a handgun in Washington state, and therefore you can apply for cop work. But nothing says that's the day you have to do it. Now we have plenty of young recruits who they're applying at 20 and a half, which is the youngest. And they have an uphill battle because they just don't have the life experience that would help them if they were 5 years later, 2 years later, 10 years later. And so for those young people and for Casey, what I said was, and we had a really recent example at work where we had a slew of very young people. So the most interest we're getting in law enforcement isn't those 30-year-olds right now, it's those 20-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And so the problem, if you will, with 20-year-old applicants is they lack life experience. And so within a day of graduation from the basic police academy, they're going to be standing in someone's living room trying to give life advice when they have no life experience of their own. And it's not a knock. It's that I'm able to draw from the hard knocks of life when I'm standing in someone's living room going, here's some empathy, or here's a way I've dealt with this. You just gain emotional intelligence over time. At least you should. And so we had a couple that really struggled, of these young recruits who really struggled with learning the job because they lacked life experience. And so to Casey, what I said was, if you want to get ahead of that, like you got to go live a little bit of life, correctly live a little bit of life. So like move out of here for no good reason. She could still live here. Like we jokingly say it's our job to make you uncomfortable so that you leave when you graduate high school or when the time is right. It's going to be different for every kid, but there's some truth to that. We don't want basement dwellers. We want independent adults. And so for her, it was right after high school. It was like, if you want to spend the next couple of years doing something, get a full-time job in a trade or doing something that will contribute to your life experience and your skills that will make you a better cop when the day comes, and move out of here. So one of the young guys in particular who was struggling at the time when I gave this advice, lived at home, which is not a bad thing for a police officer on probation who's 21 years old, who has done some school and now they're a police officer. Like, please, when you're on probation, don't go buy a house. Wait until you get that box checked so that you're non-probationary employee. But there are some ways you can, gain some life experience. And so for her, I said, move out. Be on the verge of bouncing a check, have a broken down car, have to walk to work, have to save your pennies for a couple of paychecks so you can buy some tires or a new battery or whatever. Go have some life experience, go whatever. And so to the young people who are considering policing, a career in police work, like, that's the advice I give. I inadvertently stumbled into that, because I have told the story before about being a police officer. Like I almost missed the police test. I gave it a half-assed seriousness when I applied, and it worked out. But I was living alone, like paycheck to paycheck, working at Sears, going to college to be a history teacher. And so some of that life experience paid off early on, but it was a steep learning curve, which was different life experience wise than the guy I got hired the same day as, who's now the chief of police up there and was exactly 10 years older than me. So we'd had different careers in the beginning. And so to young people, the advice I would give is, yeah, everything Tim said, but like, find a way to have some life experience. Go into the military, go to college, get a job, suffer through some adversity, but do something. Don't just sit around waiting for your birthday.
Yeah, that definitely is sound advice. As being a Gen X person and watching the newer generations growing up, it seems like those experiences, the ones that cause the growth in suffering, seem to be tempered by us as the Gen X that are raising the younger generation, as having a little bit softer and easier. Like we have it good, so we made it good for our kids, and they don't necessarily have that struggle. Broad strokes I'm painting with, like, not saying that everyone is that way, just more some self-assessment too of that I'm not trying to say, oh gosh, we had it harder than that generation or this generation. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the experiences, especially the ones that we're seeing with the applicants, that there are experiences with interpersonal interactions are not on the phone or in person. It's online. I remember hearing a story of one of our officers having probably what was one of his first phone calls to somebody other than a family member, as a 20-something-year-old, having the first phone call to somebody other than like grandma or auntie or uncle.
Did I tell you that story? Or are you actually thinking of someone else?
You did not tell me that story.
Okay, well, I will tell that actual story. I had the same experience.
Okay. People who haven't written checks, not that that's some, magic thing to have, but you talked about bouncing a check. Like, our new officers would have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
What do you mean? What are bouncing checks? It's when your PayPal or your Venmo says want one at zero, but you want to spend more, and you can't do that.
Yeah, right. Before we all got issued telephones, work phones, do you remember the patrol cars had a flip phone in the sunglass case, or in the sunglass flip down? Okay. And so I had a student officer, now a sergeant, and he was brand new, and we were on phase 1. So brand new. And a call hits the board that was an easy phone call, the type you would handle with a phone call. And so the officer starts to head towards the address, responding physically, and I said, we don't need to go to that. Just pull over, make a phone call. Like, we can close it. It was like a civil dispute or a custody issue. This is not something that we need face-to-face time. Like, we're not driving across town for that. Okay. So he's like nervous about it. I'm like, okay. So he grabs the phone, flips it open. Beep, boop, boop, boop. It's an actual flip phone. And so he makes this phone call. and it was like hard to witness. It was, I'm like, and he finally gets through the phone call and he hangs up, and I said, "What in the world was that?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Was that your first phone call? Like, have you ever never talked to a human being?" And he's like, and basically he said, "Well, other than like my grandma, like I haven't used the phone that much in my life." And I'm paraphrasing, but no, his explanation was, "No, I don't talk on the phone except my grandma or whatever." And so I was like horrified. And so
why talk when you can text?
Because grandma doesn't text.
That's true.
She does now, but not then.
Yeah.
So it's a good question. So, or it's a good transition to generational differences. And so you mentioned Gen X. If depending on where you look, Gen X ended 1980, December 31st, 1980. Okay. So there's a lesser known subset of generation called Zennial. Are you know what this term? So I was 4 days into Millennial. So functionally, I was raised a Gen Xer, but there has to be a day, right? So that Zennial is kind of different than Gen X, different than Millennial. Like grew up analog, lived through the transition. I was in high school when like the school got computers, and so I became like tech support overnight. Me and a couple of other nerds at the school. And so represented here then, three pretty distinct generational differences. Not that you're much farther along, no offense, and into Millennial, but nevertheless. So we are now seeing a shift. We're starting to hire people who were born after we started, like well after. They were born well after we started.
I started in the 1900s, and we were hiring people, yes, in the early 2000s.
Yes. And so talk about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, those generations have names and definitions because there are like discernible traits that seem to permeate across that, those periods of time. Like, are they 20 years, 10 years, however they get compressed of recent. But millennials took the beating, right? It was like, gosh, everyone would just like beat on the millennials because they were just so kooky and entitled that, they were kind of the first to enter the workforce, to really be talking and understanding what a work-life balance was. And for our Gen X and our baby boomers, when they were starting, that was just like a culture shock because the work-life balance was, I go to work so I can have a life. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of flipping on the head. It's like, no, I have a life, and work is somehow incorporated into that. And we started seeing a shift of people that want more time away from work, who want more time off, and are managing their time off differently. When I was coming through, the advice was, store up as much, don't take time off, store it up so you have a good base in case something catastrophic happens. That could be your sick leave, your comp time, your vacation leave, however, your agency would put together your leave banks. That the newer generation that were coming on, they were burning through their leave time at what causes anxiety to us older, Gen X older people. Like, man, what if something catastrophic happens? What if you break a leg skiing? You could be out for a period of time and you don't have enough time on the books. And it seemingly caused zero anxiety for that wide group of people. So cause you to kind of go, one of two things have to happen. Like, either they have to change their way or I have to change my way. I guess the third is like, we kind of meet in the middle. And I've always been a proponent of meeting people halfway and see which way it can go. Like, my way is not always the right way. So I'm willing to meet halfway to see where this is going to go. And I'm curious to see where these degrees of change are going to happen, because now the newest generation that are coming up after the millennials are tending to be more close to a work-life balance balance compared to more life side. I think the swing was for the millennials seeing the Gen X as like, abandoning us, talking about how hard it was as a kid and being latchkey kids and basically how great that was.
Yeah, drinking from a garden hose.
And, like you just rub some dirt on it when you crashed your bike because you actually were able to ride your bike until the lights came on. And then they got sheltered from all those things because technology hit. And when the technology hit, we were analog, which meant you went out and created your own entertainment. Now, when entertainment was beamed into your home, so you didn't have to leave. I'm guessing at what some of the things that cause the change are. So in the workplace, I focused on, when I was a supervisor for teams, focused on finding what each individual's like preference was. Because just because you are an early 20-something doesn't mean you are pigeonholed into be that life, possibly work-life balance, that you may be a person who is frustrated. So to try to build a consensus of where people want to be, to build teamwork at a core still has to function. And, a functional team has good communication for like a specific destination where they want to go to. So you give people a charge and incorporate them together. It makes those divisions that we all have, for be it age, grouping, or preference, it brings in one cohesive unit of operation. We operate as teams. So that's kind of a long way to get around to like, how do we work with different generations at our department? You work with each person as an individual, find their preferences, find common ground, have a common task, common mission. You can accomplish whatever you need to accomplish.
Yes, but what's happening in the workforce with the rub where those guys who are getting old are getting tired of working all the overtime, and the complaint, this is a huge generalization, that those young guys don't want to work any of their days off.
It's kind of comical of watching this circle of when I was the new guy, like we had to scrape to get the overtime, and we wanted to make money. We wanted to make more and more money. And right now we have the flip of like the younger generation be like, I make enough money with my salary. I don't want to work that overtime. That does cause friction.
Because they live at home?
Wait a second. Yeah.
It's a change in values. So.
So I just proposed the devil's advocate, and now I'll flip sides again. It's a change in values, but there's a lesson to be learned in the mindset that I don't need to live and die in this building or in this cop car. I told a story recently about like he didn't know it at the time, but what ended up being in my grandpa's last couple of years, we were sitting in a fishing shack, and out of the blue, this is a guy who worked every day of his life, who I didn't even know to have hobbies until he retired. And everyone was surprised that he retired. And we're sitting in this fishing shack along the river, and he says, out of the blue, I wish I had done this more. Mm-hmm. I didn't do this enough. Mm-hmm. Basically, I worked my life away. Now I would say he had a really good retirement. He 22, 23 years retired, like from the logging business. Like wow. he pulled the plug and stopped working. And so he enjoyed retirement. But I think, what he was actually saying to us, because it was part of a larger conversation, was, I set an example to just like work 7 days a week and work your ass off. But like, don't forget to do this part too. And so I just flip sides on my argument. But so you mentioned balance. Somewhere in there's a balance, right? I use the term like company man. Like I tend to be a company man, like what's best for the company. And that attitude probably came from the story I just told. Grandpa was self-employed, but like, I had loyalty. He had loyalty to the company, happened to be his company. But, my first loyalty as a worker is to get the job done and do a good job and be a hard worker. And the reason I say I use that term is just recently I was talking with another guy who tends to be a company guy, and he and I were lamenting about something we perceived as selfish from an employee. And I said, I just kind of always err on what's best for the company, because usually and often what's best for the company is also what's best for the employee. And so, because happy employees make a good place to work, right? And so we aren't in the business of making widgets. So we aren't like exploiting our employees to like turn over extra widgets. But what makes a good police agency is a healthy culture of cops who go out and do good work and do things right and act right. And so in that, there is a balance that you can recognize where if they are fulfilled and happy at home, then they come to work and are treated right by their employer, then they'll do good work. And then it's a big picture.
I totally agree that I'm not saying that especially my company man type approach too has been the best. And I'm glad Felicia's here too, because she can speak to the family side of it, because we just get to see our side of it. The question of like, what do you do with this reversal of, the old guys now lamenting, why aren't these young guys taking anything? Again, I've worked on those teams that have had both ends of the age spectrum, and we've been able to come with a consensus on how to rotate that stuff through. So that way everyone realizes everyone is got some skin in the game of, and it comes down to communication of, some people are like, man, I just can't do Tuesdays or Thursdays because of childcare or whatever. And, guy down next to him would be like, I got you on Tuesdays and Thursdays if it comes down to it, but I can't do, whatever, Saturday because of T-ball or whatever. So people have been, once communicated, have been willing to step up in whatever direction that they need to. But yeah, the question of the family life, my coworker, my cohort, other sergeant, he's got a child that he's raising that's several years behind his first few, and he's being super intentional now about, I need to take time to savor being with the kid. And I feel like, as I was raising my child, that I did that. And I'm sure if she was in here today, she would probably say otherwise.
No, I would disagree. I got to witness at least the last half of that. What do you have?
Well, I am sitting here listening to you guys, and it's it's just fun to hear that perspective, because of course I do have the family perspective, and I know where Tim is coming from. Even if you put in effort, you miss stuff, because law enforcement is a 24/7 job, and that means they're working on holidays, they're working on birthdays, and there's not always that opportunity to take the time off. So, I mean, what I'll say is that family support for your law enforcement officer is so important. And just makes the challenge of different personalities and team building at work even doable, because if you don't have support at home and just an understanding of the job, it makes it really difficult to show up and, put your life on the line. So I think you guys both did a really good job with your families. I will say, Brandon, back when we didn't have, what was it, PMFLA or
yes,
paternity leave, I think Brandon missed about one day for the birth of our son and went back, because what if there was a catastrophic event? And so it's different now. And when the ladies have a baby, or the husbands' wives have a baby, they get to stay home and bond with their children. And I think that's a really, really good thing. And I'm glad that change has come about. So
I think that's critically important. I think you hit the nail on the head, that the family life well-being is more important. And there is some momentary suffering for those in the agency who have a teammate that has gone for a protracted period of time. Ideally, though, that time is spent well, and it's spent well with the child, and all the parents are coming together to work together as a team at home. There is a lot of, I think it was one of the previous podcasts that you had brought up, like that realization. I think it was that brought up when you became a dispatcher that, I'm working Thanksgiving and Christmas and middle of the nights, and like how, as I was listening, like just a bizarre world that would be, I could see that could be for somebody, because I've only known it for almost 30 years. And I got married as a police officer, and my wife has followed me from the journey from before to now. Like we've been together this whole period of time. So we've been able to evolve together. And I just imagine people that get thrust into the culture of law enforcement, that if I was going to tell someone who was applying to be a law enforcement officer, do your research. If you have a significant other, bring them along with you.
Yes, 100%.
Because we are bad communicators at home.
No. That's not true.
When we had our son, I had just transferred to the new agency. And so my leave banks were tiny. And I had left 12 years at another agency where I had robust leave banks, and it would have been really easy to take leave. But so he's born, and I've got just a minuscule amount of time. And I had plenty of time where I could have taken a month off, but that would have been it. And then if I came back to work and broke my leg mountain biking on my day off, then what? And so I could not stomach, I see, like you said, from the management side, you see people with like only the time they accrue every month on the books. And I don't know how they stomach that when I don't feel comfortable with less than hundreds of hours of sick time available, just in case. And so I was in detectives at the time, and as a joke, but not really a joke, I said, "Hey, make sure you have that kid on a Friday." And so, like I used my regular days off and supplemented it with a day or two of sick and got back to work. And so I did. In detectives, it's a little bit more flexible than swing shift patrol, but that's where that came from, was that generational mindset of what if something catastrophic happens? And now with the FMLA leave in the state, like those guys are taking 12 weeks off at just a slight reduction in pay, but they're gone a long time. And from a management side, it stinks because it's hard to cover their shifts. But from like a family balance side, it makes sense.
My family has a legacy along the same lines of getting back to work. As I believe it was my dad's parents, my grandparents. I think they got married on a Sunday, and Grandpa was back to work on Monday. My parents did, and then so did I. I was in the police academy when we got married on a Sunday, and I was back in formation on a Monday. Come to birth of my child, I took a couple weeks off. I was also in a detective unit, so I was afforded some flexibility and time-wise, and made sure everything was good enough to launch at home. Those who've had kids, after a few weeks, like, okay, we got this pattern down, and we weren't teenage parents. We were in our 30s, so it was like we had an understanding of what was going on and some life experience. So, but definitely was. I made a facetious remark about my daughter like saying otherwise. I'm sure she would have wanted more time with me. But we definitely were intentional about spending time, which you obviously have seen that we're very intentional about having time with our kids, which you guys are too. And I don't know it's hard enough with one kid and two parents. I don't know how you do it with 30 kids and just the two parents. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, with that new policy, speaking of new recruits, like that's a huge positive. For entering the field. The
paid family medical leave?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. 100%. So that's one checkbox that you could share with your significant other.
And that's not something that we uniquely offer. That's a statewide,
right?
Yeah.
But
But
Still, it's great.
But for the industry, for the public safety industry, that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only industry I know, so I'm sure it's nice for others too. But it's just hasn't always been easy to take lots of time off as a cop. So
yeah.
So let's just shift gears and talk about keeping cops. And so you mentioned our culture. We're happy where we work, and we talk about the vetting process to picking people we think will fit well, and that we hope people pick us because they meet us and they think that they will fit well, but that doesn't always work out. And so occasionally people will leave our agency for another agency. Sometimes we'll get people from another agency to our agency. Mm-hmm. And so in the current job market, laterals are less common, but I think one of them is really easy to explain. My move was from a small agency with limited opportunities to a large agency with many opportunities. And so that jump was nothing negative about my previous agency. It's just, it couldn't offer me what I was looking for. Right. And so I spent my time there. About the time I was ready to move on to another agency, 2009, the recession hit, and leaving would have been silly because police agencies were laying off or they were on a hiring freeze, or they were eliminating unfilled positions. One way or the other, I had top seniority where I was, and leaving would have been foolish in 2009. And so about 2012, recession would kind of come out of that. Places were hiring again. I was ready, but that was when the neighboring chief came and said, "Hey, we understand you have these qualifications. We're looking for a SWAT medic. Would you join the team?" And my agency, my small agency, allowed me to join the SWAT team. So that kept me around for about 18 more months because that was a cool opportunity. And so, but ultimately, I left for opportunity. So, but there are people who leave our agency for opportunity, but also because they're not a good fit, or they don't feel like they're a good fit, or that they feel like they'll be a good fit somewhere else. And so we talk about retaining employees is actually financially more important than hiring new employees. Like from a business standpoint, when I lose a 5-year cop, financially, that's a huge hit because I, the agency, have spent a lot of money training him or her up for them to leave. And so it is very important that, and I use 5 years intentionally because that's kind of that sweet spot where if they're going to leave, that's the time that they're either going to jump ship to the greener pastures in another agency, or they are going to get out of the business altogether, which we also see. So pay wise, our agency pays pretty well. So not people would not be likely to leave for pay, but maybe. And so I guess
then the next one would be the work-life balance, which we come to our schedule. The schedule that we have is a very desirable schedule in that a lot of agencies in our area have gone to. I'm thinking about the reasons why people left our agency, say 10 years ago, why they were leaving. It was often they would go to one of the bigger agencies who were paying more and had this very desirable work schedule. Well, we have their same work schedule. Our pay is comparable. A bigger agency is always going to be a little bit more, but when you factor in cost of living from living in a greater metropolitan area compared to our more of a rural, that the dollars and cents kind of equal themselves out, or it's not enough to pull you away. A lot of agencies are offering a lateral incentive where they'll give you tens of thousands of dollars to go to their agency. As I've talked to other agencies and we offer one, that hasn't been that fruitful, hasn't been that beneficial of an enticement, because people who are looking to leave their agency to another one are looking for a reason, and sometimes it is money. And I think you got to ask yourself, are we looking for people that are just chasing the dollar, or someone who wants to be on board holistically with the department? So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. But there's major metropolitans, they're at, $50,000, $70,000. They'll offer a lateral, and they still aren't getting people. that just tells me that maybe it's not the money. Maybe it's the culture. And so I say that culture is key to retention. Culture that where people feel like this is my place where I want to be. It's not a workplace I go to, but they have ownership in the process, ownership at whatever level they're at. Not, man, if I just do 20 years, then I'll be able to be one of the decision makers or have my voice be heard. Even that needs to happen at the lowest level. The newest people need to, yes, they need to still realize where you're at. I mean, you need to understand that you have ideas, but they could be based on ignorance, just not knowing what it is that needs to be known culturally or historically, but at least be heard out and explain the why that maybe something isn't happening. That usually where some morale will start to decompensate is when expectations are had and expectations aren't met. And if the expectations weren't based in something tangible, realistic that could happen, then like there just becomes a mismatch of what the management can offer. And to wrangle that, to keep that in check, that's where you have to build up your first line supervisors to make sure they're equipped to handle those variances, and also have them have those interpersonal abilities to be able to relate with people that are at the lowest of the rungs. The newest guy that just hit the team from off of FTO or probation still needs to be felt like they're heard, and also know why and the mission of the department.
You mentioned the 10 years ago, the department wisely recognized that we were losing a fair handful, five plus people to a neighboring agency. And it was easy to see that they made a little bit more, and with overtime, they made a lot more. And they had a better, more desirable schedule.
Their work was less too. I didn't mean to interrupt, but like the guys that stayed friends with, they went to that agency and like, gosh, that's a bigger agency. They have more stuff going on. They're like, I'm bored. Like, yeah, there's 2-3 times as many cops working at any given time, but it's like all the same amount of calls. And like, I always thought, man, you're going to go there, you better lace your boots up. You're running all day. And like, no, back at where you guys are at, you guys are doing law enforcement all day long.
So we were up against that because word got out, like, you can go to this other place. They've got a better schedule. They get paid a little more, and they're going to call still, but not the call per cop wasn't as high.
Right.
And so the schedule, which actually I never got to work because we adopted it after I got promoted. I would love to work that now. 5 on, 4 off, 5 on, 4 off, 5 on, 5 off. Repeat.
2 weekends a month.
Every 3 weeks, you have 5-day week.
Yeah.
5-day weekend. There are guys who like taking up self-employed second jobs, doing different things. And so, that's not necessarily what I would do with 5 days off, but
a lot of guys are like, they're doing their hobby, and their hobby happens to pay.
Yeah.
Compared to just, doing the hobby.
Well, one old timer told me he was opposed to it. See if in your head you can guess who it was. He said he was strongly opposed to the 5-4, 5-4, 5-5, and he said, "Do you know how much it will cost me to have 5 days off a weekend?" And
Yes.
4 and 5 day weekends, he says, I'll go broke. And so for that reason, he was strongly opposed to it. So, but where I was going with that is wisely, the agency went, we recognize that we're losing people. These seem to be the reasons. And they worked to fix it, to adopt those things internally. And so pay has been increased fairly, and the schedule was adopted, which was no small feat because it involved promoting people, a handful of people to sergeant to create more patrol teams. It created like a bare minimum skeleton crew in staffing, and it created a bunch of problems. And so but we've made it work is the point. And it has definitely helped with recruiting and helped with retention. And so,
to that beyond that 10 years since, now we are importing people. Like we get people that are coming from those agencies and coming to ours from the major metropolitans, seeing that that the changes that we've made, positive changes, and the positive atmosphere that is not only just in our building but also collectively in our community.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on the 50-minute mark, 45-minute mark. So we've talked about retention and technology and generations. I guess specifically this one, we talked about generational differences, retention. And so we could and we will continue to talk on and on about recruiting and retention and hiring cops and what it takes. And so, but that's a good place to end today, at least for this segment. And so any final thoughts on retention or generational differences?
Go to publicsafetytesting.com and sign up to take the Longview Police Department test.
That was a recruiting spiel. Work-life balance.
Yeah, just as you guys said, just research, know what you're getting into, and do that for your significant other too. Be along for the ride.
Be along for the ride, yeah. Well, with that, thanks for watching.